Very good morning to you, and on to this important conversation now. Apartheid-era crimes might finally be prosecuted. Some law students from the University of the Western Cape have volunteered to assist with the prosecutions. The UN, you'll remember, declared apartheid a crime against humanity in 1973. Well, for more on this conversation, I'm joined by the former TRC Commissioner, Yasmin Sooka, who speaks to us from Johannesburg. Ms. Sooka, thank you very much for your time and really appreciate you coming through. Firstly, before we delve deeper into this conversation, from what you know when the TRC wrapped up its work many moons ago, are you aware of a single apartheid-era politician who has been prosecuted for what the UN has declared crimes against humanity?
Thank you, Koli, and good morning to your listeners. I have to say that what we've seen under the democratic government is absolutely shoddy. In 27 years, we've had 2 indictments which have not yet gone to trial. We've had 3 inquests, but nobody has been prosecuted for the crime of apartheid. And 23 years down the line, the only reason we have these cases is because the families of the victims have been fighting this quest for the last 23 years. As you know, when the TRC handed over its first set of reports to President Mandela, it also handed a list of more than 300 cases to the NPA, whether they should be prosecuted and where investigations demonstrated there was evidence the prosecution should follow, or alternatively, inquest could be another way of overturning rulings by apartheid inquest courts that people had committed suicide.
Yeah.
And yet, despite that, nothing has happened. The only reason you actually see any kind of progress is because civil society groups like the Foundation for Human Rights and pro bono lawyers have in fact supported the families of victims.
Yeah.
But without their courage, nothing would happen.
In your considered view, what do you think is the reason for the NPA's reticence to go into or to pursue these crimes?
Thank you for that question, because I think it goes to the heart of an article that appeared in the City Press yesterday. It is now common cause, and it's a finding of the full bench of the High Court in the Rodrigues appeal, that in fact there was political interference by the executive which led to the suppression of the TRC cases. It is also common cause that in fact the NPA admitted in that case that they had not carried out their independent job as prosecutors, and they had heeded the call not to deal with these cases. We also had a letter from them which indicated that the Hawks had indicated as far back as 2003 that they would not take up these cases. And that is why in our meetings with the ANC we have said we need to know what your policy is. After all, many of the people whose cases we are talking about died in the quest for freedom. So what is your official policy? And of course, we were very pleased when they came out, when the Rodrigues matter went to the Supreme Court of Appeals. Rodrigues is the only perpetrator indicted in the Ahmed Timol murder case.
Yeah.
And we are still waiting for a judgment there. But the ANC did come out and say they support these cases. But we asked for a lot more.
Yeah.
We said we need you to actually throw your support behind an official independent commission of inquiry. We need to know why these perpetrators allege that the democratic government after 2003 entered into negotiations with the generals for another form of amnesty. Is this true? Who's implicated? Are these guys still around? We know that we have the general saying that this process was initiated under President Mbeki, but former President Zuma played a big role in the discussions with the generals. Now, these are all things which need to be investigated, because if the reasons exist for the suppression, we need to know why. We also need to know which prosecutors in the NPA are implicated in this kind of collusion. After all, Vusi Piccoli says in an affidavit that he lost his job because he initiated these cases. The second thing we are asking for is, we have been dealing with them for 23 years. This is the NPA. In October 2019, we had a workshop with the new head of the NPA, and we were really pleased by her stated commitments to ensure that prosecutions would happen. And in fact, we had our own people dealing with a lot of the investigations. But of course, she also adopted, on the advice of people in our office, a decentralized policy. And in the period since then, all I can tell you is that on all of the cases we are dealing with, we have had no headway. And so what we did is we had a meeting with her and her team, and we said, we need a dedicated unit that only deals with the TRC cases. We need you to have a special director who will head this team of investigators and prosecutors. It should be prosecutor-led. We in fact provided all of the comparative legal opinions which show her that when political cases do well in other countries, they do so because of dedicated units. Secondly, we provided the legal framework under which all of the other special units, including the commercial crimes unit, were set up in our country. And so we said to the ANC, we don't really need the ANC to investigate cases. Obviously, whatever help they secure, including the students, including pro bono lawyers, this will be exceedingly helpful. But what we need you to do is throw your political weight between the two issues. We need to know if those who are still the obstacles are still there and what the reasons were. But secondly, we need you to throw your weight behind getting this dedicated team established. Use your Minister of Justice, your Minister of Police, the head of finance. We need them to make the money and the resources available to Shamila Botoi so that we can get a proper team. When I was listening earlier to your story about the rhinos, I thought, my God, lucky rhinos. The poachers have been indicted and they're being prosecuted. That's not what's happening to the families of victims who gave up their lives. Surely decency and the rule of law demand that the state should do its job in respect of people who gave up their lives.
Ms. Sooka, you've said quite a bit on that particular response. There is just one name I would like to pick up on and perhaps use it as a way to wrap our conversation, and wrap it very briefly for me in what you think the deals that were struck were with these apartheid generals. And I want to wrap it up with this quotation. You mentioned Vusi Piccoli, that's the former NPA head, and he is quoted here in an exchange with the then Minister of Justice, Bridget Mabandla. And he is quoted as having said, it would appear that there is a general expectation on the part of the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, SAPS, the National Intelligence Agency, that there will be no prosecutions and that I must play along with that. Well, my conscience and my oath of office that I took does not allow that. That's Vusi Piccoli responding to the then Minister of Justice. What do you think the deals were here?
The deals were to give all of those guys who did not get amnesty or who did not apply for amnesty, who sat on the sidelines watching the TRC process, to give them another chance at actually not ever having to go to prison or to make full disclosures. At one point, the families of victims and human rights groups, we actually went to court, right up to the Constitutional Court, to stop President Mbeki using his presidential discretion to provide pardons to people who had not even applied for amnesty during the TRC period. This is impunity. And Lucy Coley is probably the only head of the NPA who stood up for justice and accountability. All the ones who came after him, in fact, fell before the political interference. They were swayed, and yet you have an independent act which gives them independence. But we are calling upon Shamila Batoye to give us a renewed sense of faith in the NPA, because what we also understand is that under the Zuma administration, the institutions of the state that should work for the rule of law were destroyed. They were compromised. But to get to the point of knowing what that compromise was and what the deal was, we need this independent commission of inquiry. Every time we indict a perpetrator, do you know what they argue in court? That they too should benefit from the deal. This is what Jean Rodrigues said to the full bench in the appeal that he brought, that he too should benefit from the secret amnesty deal. This makes a mockery of the TRC process, because many people will argue, actually what we had in South Africa was not a conditional amnesty built on full disclosure and having to prove that the crimes you had committed had been in pursuit of the objectives of the former state or the liberation movements. This is a blanket amnesty, and this contravenes every single obligation that South Africa has. And it's shameful that the democratic government never punished anybody for the crime of apartheid. Today we are arguing with the NPA that you cannot prosecute these people under the Criminal Procedure Act as if this is an ordinary murder. This is what we call a state crime, and they have to be punished under international law. We have provided several legal opinions to them on that score as well. And as I speak, we are terrified that in June, when the Simelane case begins, that they are going to deal with this as if it is an ordinary kidnapping, when the truth of the matter is this is an enforced disappearance.
Yasmin Sooka, thank you very much for your time, a former commissioner at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Thanks indeed for your time.